I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The Balmoral dining room was prepared, the candles were lit, and Britain's future king was moments away from joining his family when a single face at the entrance changed everything. Prince William stopped without warning, his expression hardened. Then came the order nobody expected: cancel the dinner, close the room, and remove every place setting. Harry had appeared at Balmoral, and William refused to pretend it was an ordinary family arrival. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William moved towards the entrance with Catherine beside him, expecting a controlled family evening. Balmoral was not merely a country house. It was the royal family's private Scottish retreat, where public pressure was meant to soften into honest conversation. That made the shock sharper. This dinner had been arranged for the Prince, Catherine, King Charles, Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, and a small circle of senior household figures. Every seat mattered, because the gathering was supposed to show unity when the family could not afford another fracture. Catherine felt the change before anyone spoke. Her husband's pace slowed, his shoulders tightened, and his attention locked on the man beyond the doorway. Harry did not smile or step forward. For one suspended second, the brothers stared at each other, and years of anger rose between them without a word. She quietly asked what had happened, but William did not answer. He turned to an aide and said the Balmoral dinner was cancelled immediately. The order landed like a blow. Charles looked towards the entrance, while Camilla remained silent, and Anne watched the future king with a hard expression. The scheduled family dinner was cancelled because William had unexpectedly spotted Harry at the entry and believed the arrival had been deliberately hidden from him. Earlier that afternoon, he had reviewed the final guest list, and his brother's name was nowhere on it. Harry finally shifted, but the movement only deepened the tension. Someone inside the royal circle had authorized his presence, arranged his access, or helped him reach Balmoral without warning the man expected to lead the evening. William understood the danger at once. A secret invitation inside a divided family was not hospitality. It was a test of trust. As servants began lifting untouched plates, the prince turned from Harry and looked towards the waiting family. His voice dropped, but the question cut through the room with chilling force. Who brought him here? But before William could discover who had opened Balmoral's door to his brother, he had to confront the painful truth of what Harry's presence meant to every person waiting inside. This was not simply a prince rejecting an unexpected guest. It was one brother looking at another and seeing every interview, accusation, silence, and missed opportunity compressed into a single unbearable moment. Harry stood at the entrance, carrying the hope, or perhaps the illusion, that blood could still earn him a place inside. William stood opposite him, carrying the weight of a future crown and wounds he no longer believed could be ignored. Harry remained near the doorway, holding his voice steady, even as the rejection settled over him. Balmoral carried memories neither brother could escape: childhood summers, private grief, and the painful days when they had once depended on each other. For him, returning was not simply entering a royal estate. It was stepping back into one of the last places where he still hoped to be treated as a son and brother, rather than a public problem. "Will you speak to me privately before you decide?" he asked. William did not answer. Catherine watched both men and felt compassion collide with fear. She remembered a time when their laughter had filled family gatherings. Yet she also knew how deeply the later interviews, accusations, and broken confidences had wounded her husband. William was now the heir to the throne, the person next in line to become monarch, and that meant every private choice could affect royal stability, public trust, and the safety of his own family. He was not only facing his brother, he was protecting a future he believed could no longer survive another hidden arrangement. Charles had already received a private message earlier that day. According to a documented account prepared by a senior household aide, Harry had asked for a conversation about something too sensitive for correspondence. The king read those words alone, but chose not to tell William directly. That silence now carried enormous weight. By keeping the message from the future king, the monarch had allowed hope to grow on one side and suspicion to harden on the other. Anne felt her own concern deepen. Before dinner, she had noticed an unfamiliar vehicle entering the estate through a quieter route, and had watched it disappear beyond the main approach. The princess understood that this was no accidental arrival. Harry's presence had been arranged carefully, and someone had made sure he reached the entrance before William could be warned. She now looked towards Charles, realizing the secrecy went higher than anyone wished to admit. William finally stepped away from the dining room doors. He would not enter, sit down, or allow the evening to continue until one question was answered. Had his father approved Harry's visit? The demand forced Charles into an impossible choice: defend the son who had returned seeking a hearing, or support the son who would inherit the crown. Yet the roots of William's decision did not begin at Balmoral's entrance. They began weeks earlier, during one private royal ceremony that turned suspicion into certainty. Every family rupture has a moment that later becomes impossible to forget. For William, it was not a televised interview or a distant public statement. It was a private memorial gathering at Windsor, where one empty chair, one confidential conversation, and one message delivered after midnight convinced him that Harry was preparing to cross a boundary the future king could no longer overlook. Balmoral was merely where the consequences finally exploded. William had entered the Windsor gathering, hoping grief might create a rare moment of calm. A private memorial ceremony is a small family service held away from public attention, allowing relatives to honor someone without cameras or official performance. Yet the silence only exposed how far the brothers had fallen. Public disputes had damaged trust. Private calls had ended badly, and every attempt at contact carried the same fear. Would personal words remain inside the family, or appear later before the world? Catherine felt that fear inside her own home. She had watched her husband become more guarded around their children, more cautious about messages, and more protective of the future they were building. William believed unresolved conflict with Harry was no longer affecting only two brothers. It was beginning to disturb family life and the preparations surrounding his future reign, where one private crisis could quickly become a national distraction. William's disappointment hardened during the memorial when an old palace advisor quietly approached him. According to a documented account written after the gathering, Harry had contacted the former official without first speaking to him or Charles. The prince immediately understood the insult. His brother had bypassed the two people most directly involved and turned instead to someone who still knew the hidden roots through royal life. Harry later called and refused to apologize for making contact. In a recorded conversation preserved by a private secretary, he argued that formal channels always blocked honest dialogue before it could begin. He said every request became a briefing, every emotion became a risk, and every attempt to return was judged before he was heard. William listened, but the explanation only deepened his suspicion. Then the real trigger emerged. Harry had privately requested access to archived correspondence connected to their mother. An archive is a protected collection of old letters, records, and official papers kept for historical and family purposes. He had made the request without informing either brother or father, and the accompanying message said the material was needed before a family reckoning. Those two words changed everything. William heard not healing, but warning. He feared another painful chapter was being prepared for public release. When he later learned that the same former advisor had helped arrange Harry's secret arrival at Balmoral, the cancelled dinner no longer looked impulsive. It looked like the opening move in a confrontation planned long before the doorway. Armed with that discovery, William no longer saw a wounded brother at the entrance. He saw a man who had entered Balmoral carrying unfinished business. The silence broke when William stepped towards the entrance and finally addressed Harry directly. No aides stood between them. No cameras softened the moment. No carefully drafted statement could protect either brother from what came next. William's first words were not a greeting, and Harry's reply was not an apology. Within seconds, the cancelled dinner became something far more dangerous. A face-to-face reckoning, years in the making. William ordered the entrance hall cleared before another word was spoken. Most staff withdrew at once, leaving Catherine and a senior security officer within sight, but too far away to hear every detail. The security officer was responsible for protecting the family and controlling access to the estate, yet even he could not solve the deeper problem. Harry believed Charles had permitted the visit. The future king believed permission from his father did not excuse the decision to hide that arrival from him. William stopped only a few steps away. "You were not invited to this dinner," he said, his voice low and controlled. Harry held his ground. "I was invited to this family." The answer struck harder than a shout. For one brother, Balmoral represented a private gathering, with rules and trust. For the other, it represented blood, memory, and a place he believed should never require formal permission. Harry accused William of turning every disagreement into a test of loyalty. He said every request became a question of obedience, every mistake became evidence, and every attempt to speak was judged before it began. The prince answered that trust had disappeared when private pain repeatedly became public material. He could not protect Catherine, his children, or the future of the monarchy, while wondering whether another family conversation might later be exposed. Harry reached inside his coat and produced a sealed envelope. According to a recorded account later prepared by the security officer, he told William he had not traveled to Balmoral merely to ask for forgiveness. The letter was intended for Charles and concerned the Windsor Archive request. A royal archive is a protected collection of family records and official papers, and access to it is tightly controlled, because those documents may contain deeply private history. William noticed the royal household marking pressed into the envelope. His anger shifted into suspicion. That symbol meant someone with current palace access had supplied material, guidance, or authority that Harry should not have possessed alone. The secret arrival was no longer the only betrayal. Charles entered before either brother could continue. The king saw the envelope in Harry's hand and stopped immediately. Alarm crossed his face, but surprise did not. Charles's expression revealed that the letter was not unexpected, and suddenly the question was no longer why Harry had come, but what the king already knew. Power inside a monarchy rarely announces itself with shouting. Sometimes it appears in a father's hesitation, a son's refusal to step aside, or a sealed envelope held between two men who no longer trust one another. Charles had allowed Harry to come to Balmoral, but he had not told William. In that omission, the future king saw more than poor judgment. He saw a direct challenge to the authority he believed he was already being forced to carry. Charles set his reading glasses down and admitted the truth. He had approved a brief conversation with Harry, but he had never intended his younger son to appear at the formal family dinner. As sovereign, the reigning monarch with final control over royal residences, he could authorize entry to Balmoral. Yet that power could open a gate, not repair trust. It could permit Harry's arrival, but it could not force William to sit beside him, as though years of damage had disappeared. William felt the confession like a betrayal. He told his father that secrecy had turned a possible conversation into an ambush. The prince was already carrying greater responsibility for succession, family security, and the monarchy's future direction. Succession means the legal order deciding who inherits the crown, and every crisis around it threatened the stability he was expected to protect. Charles answered with visible sadness that open arrangements had become impossible because every attempted meeting collapsed before it began. Harry remained silent until the king explained how the visit had been arranged. According to a documented account prepared by a longtime household aide, Charles had asked that official to guide his younger son through a secondary estate route. The plan was meant to prevent confrontation until father and son could speak alone. Instead, it created the very explosion the monarch had feared. William heard every detail and realized the deception had not been careless. It had been organized. Charles then looked towards the sealed envelope. In a private recorded conversation with his aide earlier that day, he had been warned that the letter concerned correspondence linked to Diana and old palace decisions involving both brothers. Those papers could reshape how the family understood Harry's isolation, William's protection, and the institution's treatment of two grieving sons. The king knew the contents might reopen wounds, but he also feared what would happen if they remained buried. William refused to step back. Harry would not remain at Balmoral, he declared, unless the letter was opened before all three men. No private reading, no hidden version of events. No more decisions made behind closed doors, and revealed only after trust had already collapsed. Charles looked from one son to the other, and understood that delay was no longer possible. The king finally reached for the envelope, but what emerged from it would turn a cancelled dinner into a crisis affecting the entire royal household. Charles opened the envelope expecting a private appeal. Instead, he found a carefully assembled record of conversations, dates, and handwritten notes that pulled old wounds into the present. William watched his father read the first page, pause, and lower himself into a nearby chair. Harry said nothing. The room had changed. The argument was no longer about an uninvited appearance. It was about who had controlled the truth inside the royal family. Charles read through correspondence written after Diana's death, when both boys were still grieving, and palace officials were deciding how much press attention, public duty, and family conflict they should face. The papers described promises of protection, private warnings, and arguments over who should speak for the young princes. Royal correspondence means letters and official notes exchanged within the family and household, often kept away from the public because they contain deeply personal decisions. Harry believed these records explained why he had slowly felt pushed aside. William feared they could be used selectively to tear open history and damage the crown. Charles reached one handwritten passage and stopped. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the pages, and said nothing. Guilt settled over him because the note referred to choices made when his sons were too young to understand them. Exhaustion followed, heavier than anger. The king had spent years trying to hold together a family and an institution, yet the document suggested that silence had protected neither. William felt sympathy for his father, but his anger towards Harry remained sharp. He believed his brother had chosen the family dinner because the timing would create maximum emotional pressure. The future king could understand the pain behind the letter without accepting the method. To him, truth presented as an ambush was still a weapon. Harry finally pointed to one specific note. According to the documented archive summary, a promise had been made that neither brother would be excluded from a major family gathering without a direct explanation from the sovereign. The word sovereign means the reigning king or queen with final constitutional authority. For Harry, that promise proved his presence at Balmoral was not an intrusion. For William, it raised a darker question. Who had revived that old commitment, and why now? The answer came from another page. The former palace advisor who accessed the papers had recently communicated with someone inside Charles's current household. Secrecy had not ended with Harry. It had reached into the king's own circle. Catherine entered with confirmation from a senior aide. News of the cancelled dinner had already escaped Balmoral. The family no longer had the luxury of private delay. If they did not define the moment themselves, headlines would do it for them. As the first headlines began to move, two people stepped away from the palace machinery and faced the one question no document could answer. Was reconciliation still possible? For the first time that evening, there were no advisors, no father, no sealed documents, and no future titles, standing visibly between them. William and Harry entered a small private room and closed the door. Outside, Balmoral was alive with whispers. Inside, two brothers faced each other, not as heir and exile, but as men shaped by the same loss and divided by what each believed survival had required. Catherine had forced the moment by telling Charles that no formal meeting could succeed, while aides, protocols, and prepared words stood between the brothers. A formal meeting is a controlled royal discussion, shaped by officials, agreed subjects, and strict boundaries. This conversation had none of that protection. The king agreed because the dinner was already beyond saving. What remained was more serious: whether his sons could preserve any relationship after years of mistrust. Harry spoke first. He admitted that arriving without William's knowledge had been wrong, but said a planned request would never have reached the estate. Every message, he argued, would have passed through advisors who had already decided he was a threat. According to a recorded account later prepared from his private notes, he believed secrecy was the only route left to an honest conversation. The excuse did not erase the betrayal, but it finally named the fear behind it. William answered with a confession of his own. Seeing Harry's face had triggered anger before reason, because Balmoral felt like one of the last places where his wife, children, and future responsibilities should be safe from surprise. The prince said his reaction was not only about past interviews or public accusations. It was about losing control inside his own family, while being expected to protect the future of the crown. Harry then made the promise that changed the room. He said the archive material would not be published, sold, or shared with producers, writers, or broadcasters. An archive is a protected collection of historical letters and records, and these papers carried private memories that could wound the entire family if used publicly. His documented pledge removed the threat that had driven William's strongest suspicion. William did not offer forgiveness. Instead, he set one condition: future contact had to be direct, private, and free from intermediaries who gained influence by carrying messages between wounded brothers. No secret advisors, no surprise arrivals, no family pain turned into leverage. The brothers did not embrace. They did not pretend the damage had vanished, but William opened the closed door himself and allowed Harry to remain for a smaller private meeting with Charles and Catherine. At that exact moment, confirmation arrived that the cancelled dinner had reached the public. Their private compromise prevented a complete family collapse, but outside Balmoral, the world had already transformed one closed door into a national symbol. By morning, the untouched Balmoral table had become more powerful than any official statement. Across Britain, the cancelled dinner was interpreted as rejection, protection, punishment, and heartbreak, all at once. Yet one image captured the public mood more clearly than the endless commentary. Two unused place settings, visible through a service doorway, as staff quietly cleared the room where the royal family had failed to sit together. Palace communications officials moved quickly, but their first response was deliberately narrow. They confirmed only that the planned dinner had not taken place, and refused to discuss Harry's arrival or William's private instructions. Palace communications means the official team responsible for explaining royal events to the public and the press. Their silence was meant to contain the crisis, but it had the opposite effect. Every missing detail became a new theory, and every theory pulled the brothers further into public judgment. Catherine felt the coverage turning pain into spectacle. She knew William's decision had come from shock, fear, and a need to protect his family. Yet headlines reduced it to a battle for control. Harry felt a different wound. He feared the world would see only an uninvited prince at a closed door, and ignore his attempt to speak honestly about the past. Both men had entered Balmoral carrying private hurt. By morning, that hurt belonged to everyone. Charles watched the reports without speaking. The king understood that his secret invitation had placed both sons in a confrontation neither was ready to face. He had hoped privacy would create peace, but secrecy had created suspicion instead. The failure mattered because the monarchy depended on public confidence, and the public was now watching a family struggle to practice the unity it represented. Then one front page captured the entire crisis. According to a documented media briefing circulated inside the household, the morning edition carried the headline, "The Dinner That Never Happened," above an image of Balmoral's gates and 2 empty chairs. The words turned an unfinished meal into a symbol of brotherhood, rejection, and loss. Outside the estate, a small crowd gathered near the boundary wall. One woman stepped forward and placed 2 white flowers beside it, one for each brother. The gesture was quiet, but it cut through the noise. Public curiosity had become a plea for peace. William saw that image and understood silence would make the rupture appear final. He began preparing a family-approved statement that would explain the cancelled dinner without exposing the private agreement made behind closed doors. The words William chose would not restore the lost evening, but they would decide whether Balmoral became the symbol of a broken family or the boundary that finally stopped it breaking further. The final truth was simpler and more painful than the headline suggested. William cancelled the Balmoral dinner because Harry's secret arrival made him feel deceived, exposed, and cornered inside a place he considered safe. But he did not order his brother from the estate. He did not end all contact. And before the night was over, the 2 men made a quieter decision. Trust could not be demanded, but it could be rebuilt under boundaries neither would violate again. William allowed the formal dinner to remain cancelled. The untouched gathering would not be restored, because pretending the breach had never happened would have made every apology feel false. A formal royal dinner is a carefully arranged family event with fixed guests, agreed seating, and symbolic meaning beyond the meal itself. Once secrecy had broken that structure, continuing it would have turned unity into performance. The prince chose an empty table over a dishonest display. Harry left Balmoral the following morning, after speaking privately with Charles and agreeing that the archive material would remain inside the family. The papers would not reach writers, producers, or broadcasters. For the younger brother, that promise was more than a concession. It was proof that he could tell his story without using it as a weapon. For the king, it offered a rare chance to protect both sons from another public war. William stood beside Catherine after the estate had grown quiet and admitted that cancelling the dinner had felt brutal. He knew the order had humiliated his brother and wounded his father, yet he believed silence would have caused deeper damage. She understood the cost. The future king had not acted because he felt nothing. He had acted because too much remained at risk: his family's safety, public trust, and the fragile authority he was preparing to inherit. Harry paused before leaving and looked back towards the residence with sadness. Yet relief softened the pain. William had spoken to him. The door had not closed forever. Charles then destroyed the written instructions used to guide his younger son through the secondary entrance. According to a documented household account, the king tore the pages himself, ending the secret route that had caused the confrontation. No future meeting would be shaped by hidden access, competing advisors, or manipulation. William and Harry exchanged private contact details, reserved for direct communication. No intermediaries, no leaks, no surprise arrivals. The cancellation was neither a victory nor a final rejection. It was a painful declaration that family access could not exist without honesty. Balmoral became the night when unity stopped meaning silent performance and began meaning truthful boundaries. The table remained empty, the candles were extinguished, and the evening entered royal history not as the night 2 brothers finally separated, but as the night they stopped pretending and chose a harder, more honest form of hope. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.